Lakeland PBS presents Common Ground, brought to you by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund and the citizens of Minnesota. Production funding of Common Ground is made possible in part by First National Bank Bemidji, continuing their second century of service to the community. Member FDIC. Closed captioning is made possible by Bemidji Regional Airport, serving the region with daily flights to Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport. More information available at bemidjiairport.org.
Welcome to Common Ground. I'm producer-director Scott Knudsen. In this episode, producer Randy Cadwell takes us to Itasca State Park for a class and a conference with the Northern Minnesota Metalsmiths.
This event is the spring conference for the Northern Minnesota Metalsmiths organization. It's a time for all of us metalsmiths to get together, and we have demonstrators come, so it's a time for fellowship and a time for learning from other experts in the field. We have a core group of people that meet once a month down at Lake Itasca Regional Pioneer Farmers Grounds of about 15 to 20, but our membership is around 185 people that come. So not everybody makes the meeting, but a lot of the members make the conference due to the fact that we have some very spectacular guests that show up and experts in their field to show us some of the new things they're doing and the old things as well. Iron was just as important as fire as far as the development of the industrial age. Blacksmiths could use iron to make tools, and of course weapons were the first thing. It changed our history. Right there, the trajectory of our species.
The blacksmith was like almost looked at as some type of magician. They were held in high regards because it's not something that everybody can do. It takes some practice to be able to know what you're doing, but you know, we didn't have welders and drill presses and angle grinders.
And then during the Industrial Revolution time, the blacksmith was kind of faded away. Once you started having hardware stores and places where you could go buy a nail or a screwdriver or a hammer, the blacksmith was more relegated to like doing some repair work, restoration type work. And then it died out into the 70s to be almost non-existent, except for a few. But it started to resurge again in the early 2000s. And then of course, when you had the TV shows come on about Forged in Fire, well then everybody and their brother wanted to be a knife maker. So we've seen an explosion in attendance at our meetings from the past few years alone. And then hammer your end down there a little bit. It'll make more of a curl. Oh, I like that. There you go. I think the artistic blacksmiths back in the day were building items for churches and castles, and rich people wanted very ornate metalwork to be done. So this blacksmithing evolved into, I almost don't even want to use the term artistic blacksmith, but artisan blacksmith work is probably a better way to term it. There's smiths out there today that still specialize in that work, and you can't ever hardly get them to do anything for you because they're very busy. Because it's still a hammer in a hand hitting on an anvil, a piece of hot steel. It's slow. So anything in metalwork is usually slow. So if you're looking for any kind of special work to be done, have a lot of patience.
And so I'll be using the round side of it because I'm working on that inner one.
We always have two demonstrators, one in the field of knife making, which is very popular these days, and the other is more of a traditional blacksmith, more of an ornamental type blacksmith. Cody Hofsummer is a knife maker, and his profession is a farrier. And Cody is just amazing. He's been a demonstrator for us twice, and I think it was 4 or 5 years ago he's demonstrated for us, and it's amazing to see the work he's doing now. He's branching off into doing custom folding knives as well, which are fabulous because that's a whole nother level of knife making. And his Damascus patterns are unmatched. I don't know anybody that can do the work that he does better than him. I kind of say jokingly, we love to hate him because he's so good. We love him, he's a great guy, he's personable, he's a fantastic demonstrator, but at the same time, when you look at his work, he makes it look so easy.
Knife makers come in two varieties. We're bladesmiths, and we are knife makers or stock removal knife makers. So a stock removal person takes a sheet of steel, cuts and grinds off everything that they don't want. Bladesmith takes fire and manipulates and forges the blade out. So we have a few advantages, and we can take non-traditional stock, we can take round stock or a ball bearing even, and forge it into a blade. So we have a few more options. We also have a lot more options to mess up the steel in doing so, where a stock removal person has to start with a big sheet, especially if there's a curve in something, they'd have to start with a large sheet and end up wasting a bunch of that steel. So today, the most part, my talk's going to be on guards and handles. At least that's where we're going to start. If you guys have questions, ask. I'm here for you guys more than anything. So whatever I can do to help you guys out is why I'm here. We're going to kind of base today's talk on this, a knife like this. This is my Wrangler pattern. This particular one is in a Gorgon flower Damascus. It has ringed gidgee on the handle. The guard is stainless. So the class that we did was on guards and handles, and it was more on the maybe some of the nuances of guards and handles on especially hidden tang knives. We took some of the nuances of turning a square piece of steel into slotting it, and you run this a few times, you'll cut a little bit of a line in there. And then with a fairly sharp center punch, you should be able to feel that just a little bit. So it might take a little bit more, but that would be one way to get a true line that you can drill your 1/8 inch holes or whatever closer to. Drill from the backside with a bigger hole just to make life a lot easier so you're removing a lot less. I hate filing. It just sucks, especially with the 1/8 inch tool. So it's like those cooking shows where they put it in the oven and then they pull out the one that's already done. Boom! There it is. So see how easy that was when you scratch that line in there? No, so this one was actually done on the mill. A mill is great. Then fitting it to the tang of the knife, fitting it to here, then shaping the guard and contouring it. Again, my opinion, my rules, my knife, I do not want this face straight. I see a lot of good knife makers do that. I don't like it. It's just, it shouldn't be flat. In my mind, it has to be through the blade, but anything that sticks out below, I want that broken and rounded back just a little bit. A lot of knife makers, a lot better than me, do this flat, and I see why. It's a lot easier. Eventually gluing it and how I glue it to a blade and using this little press to hold it in place as the glue dries. Then we moved on to actually handle shaping and fitting, and I do a deal where I bed the tang and I can take the blade, the handle on and off the blade, which not everyone does, so it's a little bit unique. So this guard has been glued on, the handle was fit, you can see my scribe lines, poured it in, waxed the tang, poured it in. This one has not ever been out. I did this, I think yesterday morning I glued it. It doesn't really matter if it sits a day or a week. So we'll just put this on. Sometimes they come off.
Now there she goes.
Just like that. So.
That's because you waxed it.
I waxed it.
So I don't try to take it all the way across the face. I just try to watch my line knock the corner off. Do that on all 4 lines that I put on there. The handle should have a slight curve to it. This is going to come in here. It's going to connect down here like that. In the end, I'm going to end up carving this in just a little bit like that. Put it back on every once in a while and just look at it and just see if everything is lining up. That line across the blade to the handle really makes the knife, that continuous line there. I've made them before where they look like they've been broke. They kind of come up and then they peak, and again, it's that one I didn't even see until it was in a photograph from the guy who bought it, you know, and you're like, he didn't see it, but I saw it in the picture later, you know, and you know, nothing to do about it now, but so just, you know, check that out. So I'm going to come to about here, and I'm going to come to here, and I'm going to make a straight line there to there, and then I'm going to come through and I'm going to make a little cut to them like this. I'm getting pretty close to going to files on the back half of it. And eventually it will finish out to look something like this.
That is what is called a broken back sax blade.
We got Lars Morsch from Denmark to come over this year. We worked with the Viking Connection out of Fargo and the North House Folk School to bring Lars over here just to put him to work for about a month. Doing demonstrations, and that guy likes to work. He's more of a traditional blacksmith, focusing on the Viking age of metallurgy and also the history of metalworking in the Viking age. He is just more of a, I want to even call him a professor of Viking age blacksmithing. He knows the history, he knows everything, and there's pretty much not a question that he can't answer.
While we're waiting for the rest, I have some knife blades that are typical Viking style, and you're more than welcome to come and have a look at it. Some of it is sharp and some of it is definitely sharp. So, in the Viking era, iron was very, very big. It was still a tiring and a long process to making the material very, very expensive, but it was the best they could. So they were willing to put all this time and resources into making iron because it was superior to everything else. During industrialization, and especially the immigration period that you have here, iron played an enormous important part of this building of the society. Everything was built by hand up till like 1850 or 1900s, and iron to make tools of anything was completely dominant. And the making of these processes were quite often a little bit primitive. A forge like this could be brought out into the middle of nowhere with a hand crank or a foot pump or whatever. You could heat up this sturdy material and shape it into the tool you wanted without having to bring it to a modern machine shop facility. The class that I'm doing here was going to be all about Viking techniques, demonstrating some of these forge welding techniques that the Viking used, and with some of the materials they had in hand. A lot of forge welding today relies on borax as a flux. The Vikings didn't have that, so what did they use? They used sand. So I showed a number of different ways to utilize the sand as a flux. Right, let's do some proper demonstration. I'm going to take it from the very start and just move it slowly so that everybody gets a chance to see what it looks like. What I'm doing now is simply just thinning out this piece of, in my world it's 10 by 10, but it probably isn't. It's probably, is that called 3/8 by 3/8? That's probably what it is then. Smaller than 1/2 inch. very, very few businesses still do restoration work on some of the preserved buildings and stuff like that, railings and things like that. And a small market that I'm trying to fill where people have an interest in original tools, shape and sizes. But for many blacksmiths, not unlike the Metalsmith Guild here, it's a hobby. It's a hobby that people will spend a lot of time on, but it's really, really not a hobby that will ever make them get the sales that will bring back the money that they invested in it. So for a lot of people, blacksmithing today is much more a passion and a fun thing to do. You could call it a craft, basically. What I'm trying to do is just prepare the materials. I've prepared the mild steel, and now I'm preparing that small bit of carbon steel that's going to go in there. But I think there's something deeply embedded in mankind that heating things up. I mean, the fire has always been something that will provide mankind with warmth and hot food and coziness. And I've seen quite a lot of people come to watch me forge or watch other people forge. They would just stand there and stare into those flames. And then at some point when the blacksmith is pulling out this red hot iron, everybody knows that iron is difficult to work with, and for a lot of people just drilling a hole through a piece of iron is almost impossible. But this blacksmith can just heat it up, and all of a sudden it's like Play-Doh kind of consistent, and you can shape it and do, well, you can do whatever you want with it if you have the skills to it. I think that is always something that will intrigue people. You really need to try some of the techniques that the Vikings had in order for it to appreciate the skills they had. And everybody is always interested in knowing about their roots, whether it's their roots from the 1800s or it's crafts roots. Something like this. It doesn't have to be, if you're looking at the original finds, they were not much sharper than this, which for a modern bladesmith is quite rough work. Yeah. You'll have to think that most of the knives in the Viking era were just plain tools. Yeah, I mean, they didn't, I mean, most of them had a knife because that was the one-off tool that they all needed for anything, eating or anything really. But most of it were very, very simple tools, and most of the people that owned them were very, very poor, couldn't afford making anything fancy stuff. Let's see which side is which, this here. Now this is the tricky part. It's already thin, and you really shouldn't try and re-weld this, but I'm going to have to. If not, we'll just have to start over again. Now, what I'm going to try and do now is I'm going to try and forge it so it's tapered. Because the Vikings, as I already mentioned, they didn't have grinders, so they didn't make knives like this, right? Because that there's a ground bevel. They didn't have the option of doing that, so all their blades would be triangular shaped like this. And that is a little bit different when you forge it. If it was going to be ground, you can just basically leave it at that and then shape a tip of it on it. But in order for it to become triangular shaped, you need to forge that. The Vikings used a file or a stone or maybe a scraper to finish the blade off prior to heat treatment. That means that they actually have to forge much closer to the finished shape of the blade. Now, I like to use a little bit more light hammer for that, but just personal preference. Now, this is going to be the edge. It doesn't look like it, but that is going to be the edge, because when I forge that in a triangular shape, that tip there is going to come up. There are a few Norwegian swords that we think is made in Norway, because the Norwegian sword technology were a little bit behind. This may come as a shock, but Norwegians are in generally a little bit behind. from a Danish point of view anyway. They liked the one-sided swords for a very long time. This was quite a common weapon in the Iron Age leading up to the Viking Age. But in southern Scandinavia, the double-edged sword took over quite early. Those are the ones that I mentioned, the Roman swords that were found in the bogs with very, very lovely patterns. They were double-edged, made by the Romans. But the Norwegians seem to be holding on to the single-edged sword for a little bit longer. So we know that they made Viking swords in the Viking era, the Viking era in Norway with only one edge, and they were made locally. Some of them with patterns like this, but in a sword length, right? Some of them are even found with handles on quite big, beastie, sort of machete-like weapons. Weird stuff.
At our function, one of my favorite things we do is we have an auction. It's not a silent auction, it's an auction, and it's the highlight of the event, where all our members bring things to donate to the auction, which raises money for our organization. And you never know what's going to be on that auction. Anywhere from old blacksmithing equipment, knives and tools that other smiths have made, which is my favorite, and also just a lot of things that people bring in that they're not using anymore. We have a lot of our older members who are bringing in items for the auction, and they just donate it rather than try to sell it on eBay or something like that. So you can find some treasures. We opened up the first Monday of every month. We did this about 4 years ago. The first Monday of every month was open forage. You did not need to be a member of our organization. You just needed to come on out and try us out, see if you like it. And our attendance grew and grew and grew, mostly with young kids, young men and young women were showing up to do this. And that was really inspiring for the rest of us. I'm probably one of the younger members when I started out with the group in about 2010. I was in my 40s, and now it's fun to see teenagers there with it. So I think it's going to grow. And I do think we're moving into a repair economy again. Our nation goes in cycles for economics. And once we hit a little bit of a downturn in our economy, people want to repair instead of buy. And I think blacksmith and the metal worker and the metalsmith, I guess I should just call him, is just the right person to fill that role. I was doing this on my own in about the 2009 timeframe. YouTube was pretty limited at that time, and I was, you can tell my age, I did a lot of reading and DVDs to learn the craft. But I had a gentleman who'd been with the club a long time stop by my house and said, "Hey, why don't you come to the club?" And I said, "There's a club?" I didn't know. But what it did for me is once I got around a lot of these old, cranky, cantankerous looking fellas, I realized that they wanted me to be successful. And once they realized I was serious about my craft, they were pouring knowledge out at my footsteps to make me successful. There's no secrets in blacksmithing right now. It used to be like that in the old age, where the blacksmiths kept their secrets about heat treating and metallurgy. But now I find that the older generation, it's the shoulders of the people I stand on. They want me to be successful, and they're a phone call away at all times.
These guys that come to this conference taught me a lot. It's like a big family, nobody has secrets. Or it's like everybody's willing to share their craft and teach what they know to anybody else. So it's as long as they're willing to learn and listen. You want to tick off a blacksmith when he's trying to teach you, don't listen to his advice, or don't do what he's trying to teach you.
Working that little area at the end. You're doing good. I always tell people, if you want a good addiction, get into metalwork, but it's also a long path of seeing other demonstrators, seeking out classes for yourself, and then you're going to find your tribe if you get a hold of a metalsmithing organization around your local area. I didn't realize there was a tribe of people as probably as crazy as I was, I suppose, that were thinking about doing this as for a profession. They call it a percussion therapy, I've heard it said.
I think it quite quickly, it went from a hobby or a general interest, combining craft and history, into something that my wife will call an obsession. And we talked about that with some of the other guys from the guild here last night, and they say, look, once you're hooked, you're hooked. That feeling of hitting the iron with a hammer once it's at the right temperature and it goes really soft and smooth, and that joy when things are just working just the way you want it. And I think you get that kind of very grounded feeling when you go to the workshop. You're actually producing something. I talked to a couple of guys up there they've got office jobs during the day, and then they go to the shop, because there they can, over a couple of hours, they can without any cooperative responsibilities or any bosses looking over their shoulders, they can just be there for themselves, do something, and when they're closing up, there it is. Very, very sort of down to earth and kind of simple, really.
Thanks for watching. Join us again on Common Ground.
If you have an idea for Common Ground in north central Minnesota, email us at legacy@lptv.org or call 218-333-3014. To watch Common Ground online, visit lptv.org and click Shows. To order episodes or segments of Common Ground, call 218-333-3020. Production funding of Common Ground is made possible in part by First National Bank Bemidji, continuing their second century of service to the community. Member FDIC. Closed captioning is made possible by Bemidji Regional Airport, serving the region with daily flights to Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport. More information available at bemidjiairport.org. Common Ground is brought to you by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund, with money by the vote of the people November 4th, 2008. If you watch Common Ground online, consider becoming a member or making a donation at lptv.org.